So today we'll be talking about chapter 14, section 1. And we're really talking about the expansion of industry, an explosion in technology, and how at the end of the 1800s, we're going to begin talking about an industrial boom for several reasons. And first, we're going to begin by looking at why this technological revolution occurred in the United States and why did it occur at this time. So the first thing I want to show you is this. It's an oil well, the first of its kind, the first well that pumped oil out of the ground. And guess what? It was in the United States. A man named Edwin Drake built the very first oil well. And as you can imagine, this was a game changer. So by the 1920s, the United States was the world's leading industrial power due to a number of factors. Number one, we're a large country. The United States is about as big as Western Europe. So think about that. We call Napoleon creepy for trying to conquer Western Europe. We call Hitler evil. Well, of course, he did try to kill millions of people, but we also called him evil and tried to stop him for conquering Western Europe. When we conquered the United States, we conveniently called it manifest destiny and considered ourselves justified in building an empire larger than Julius Caesar had. Interesting, right? So, now we reap the benefits of our conquest because we have a nation wealthy in natural resources. That's one point. Secondly, the government tended to support business, particularly big business, at all times, even to the detriment of the American worker. And then finally, a rapidly growing urban population, a cheap labor force. So you need several things to make innovation work. These are called the factors of production. You need land, you need labor, you need capital. We had all three of those in plenty. The first one I want to talk about is oil, because it's certainly one of the more important technological revolutions that we'll be talking about. Oil has been around, well, we don't know exactly, for millions of years perhaps. It just bubbles out of the ground in some places. In fact, Native Americans had been using it for medicine, for fuel, for tens of thousands of years. However, it was in 1859 that Edwin Drake first used a steam engine, as you saw in the picture previously, to drill for oil. And this led to the explosion of the petroleum and refining industry. In fact, up until the Second World War, the United States was the world's leading producer of oil.
Another business that fueled the industrial expansion was oil. When Edwin L. Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859, no one could foresee the impact that it would have on the nation. Initially, it was not of much use. Greasing wagon wheels and nostrums were all it seemed good for, until a Yale professor discovered that it could be refined into three important products: gasoline, kerosene, and a distillate used to form new substances. From 1860 to 1900, dozens of developers applied for patents as motor applications increased with demand. Some industrialists were wildly successful in exploiting this new market. Among them was a young man named John D. Rockefeller. Born to a New York peddler in 1839, Rockefeller went on to become the first oil billionaire. At age 16, John D. Rockefeller began working as a clerk in a produce company. While there, he formed a partnership in a grain commission. Rockefeller used those profits to enter into the oil business at 23 years of age. Rockefeller set out to make the fledgling oil industry efficient. His goal was to establish a centralized control system to curtail wild price variations and waste. 15 years later, the goal was reached when his Standard Oil Company of Ohio controlled the flow of oil products from producer to consumer. Rockefeller's companies had acquired crude oil fields, long-distance pipelines, and operated retail outlets. By 1880, Standard Oil owned the chief refineries in New York City, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. Ultimately, Rockefeller controlled 90% of the world's oil trade under the Standard Oil Trust, which comprised 41 companies. The trust was dissolved in 1892 by the Supreme Court for antitrust violations. Although railroads, steel, and oil were among the most influential industries of the late 19th century, they were not alone in their prosperity. Prior to the Civil War, the U.S. Patent Office issued less than 1,000 patents annually. By 1890, inventions were being registered at the rate of 25,000 each year. The invention of the typewriter, the adding machine, and the cash register sped the growth of business. George Eastman's Brownie camera, the elevator, and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone all mark this new season of ingenuity. By 1900, Bell's phone had found its way into 1 million homes.
The second one I want to talk about is steel. Steel also proved to be a game changer. And there's a number of reasons this revolution occurred in the United States. Number one, abundant raw materials. You need a couple things to make steel. First off, you need coal, because coal can burn at a hot enough temperature to melt raw iron. Because all steel is refined iron. Secondly, you need an abundance of raw iron. Well, thankfully, since we have such a big country, we have plenty of sources for raw iron. But secondly, there's a major change in the production of steel that occurred in the late 1800s in the United States. A man named Henry Bessemer figured out a process to refine iron into steel in large quantities cheaply. It's called the Bessemer process, that if you inject air into molten iron, it can quickly remove carbon to make steel. Later, the open hearth process also began the recycling of scrap metal or raw materials. There's still a market for scrap metal. There are people who wander around Henderson County looking for scrap metal because they know they can sell it to refineries, because they know refineries will buy it. Because of the open hearth process, it can be melted down and remade and repurposed. So now that steel can be produced far more cheaply than previously, it can be used practically for railroads. It can be used practically for farmers and barbed wire and even farm machines. Whereas previously you had to be very wealthy to afford the products of a blacksmith. I mean, swords were owned by the very wealthy because it was expensive to make fine steel. Now, steel was being used in skyscrapers, on train tracks, and on farms across the country and world. This is a smelter. They're huge in many cases. There's been one on the old Augusta site in Brevard since I've lived here. it is as tall as the first story of this building. It can melt down raw iron in large quantities. Air is injected through the bottom, as you can see, and large quantities of iron can be refined into steel at once.
For decades, steel had combined the strength of wrought iron with the durability of cast iron, but the costly process of extracting carbon from iron made it a luxury. Then, in 1859, Kentuckian William Kelly and Englishman Henry Bessemer, working independently, discovered a way to inject air into the molten metal, burning off enough carbon to render steel. Once this process was refined, steel became affordable and easy to produce. The steel race had begun. In 1870, 77,000 tons were produced each year. By 1900, that amount had skyrocketed to 11.4 million tons annually. Andrew Carnegie was the predominant steel baron of his time. Emigrating from Scotland at age 12, he went to work as a bobbin boy at a Pittsburgh textile mill. His wisdom in surrounding himself with highly talented lieutenants helped to put his competitors out of business. Carnegie once remarked that his epitaph should read, "Here lies the man who was able to surround himself with men far cleverer than himself." Carnegie realized the enormous potential for steel during a trip to Europe in 1872, and soon established a massive factory near Pittsburgh, the most modern of its day. Fed by iron ore from Lake Superior and coal and limestone mined in the east, Pittsburgh soon became the steel capital of the world. Carnegie sold his steel company to banker J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $480 million. He retired with a guaranteed income of $1 million per month. Morgan congratulated him on being the richest man in the world. The company later combined with others to become the United States Steel Corporation, U.S. Steel.
And so today we're talking about the age of inventions and how these new technologies changed the landscape and changed people's lives and even the way that we work. And so in this little video that you're seeing, you can get a glimpse of how a light bulb works. So what you're watching is a filament, a little piece of tungsten metal, which is being heated up with electricity. And then just for the purposes of demonstration, I wanted to show you one blowing out. Because the problem with the light bulb was the question of what type of metal can take heating and reheating, heating and reheating. Because if you know anything about metal, you know that once it's been heated and cooled, it becomes brittle and breaks. Next time you're bored, start playing with a paper clip. You can bend it, you can bend it, you can bend it, and of course it will eventually break. It's the same process. The question is how to find a type of metal that won't become brittle and break after being heated and cooled. Thomas Edison once said, in addition to discovering how to make the light bulb, I found thousands of ways not to make the light bulb. He tried and tried and tried. But the point is, he continued to try. He tried every metal he could think of. And in the end, tungsten proved to be the effective metal. Not only did he patent the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb, he also created an electrical grid. Now, to be fair, he wasn't the first to do so. I'm sure you've heard of Tesla and his ideas that were revolutionary for the electrical grid. Ideas that perhaps could have even led to cheaper and more abundant electricity for all. Well, Thomas Edison borrowed on many of these ideas and developed the first electrical grid in the United States. And his company became a household name. And obviously, electricity was a major game changer when it became available in homes, for appliances, in factories, which now no longer have to locate near moving water. And this is going to allow for the rapid growth of industry. So here's Thomas Edison with his most famous invention.
But supreme among all inventors was Thomas Alva Edison. Among his many inventions, Edison was responsible for the phonograph, the mimeograph, the dictaphone, improved film projectors, storage batteries, and, of course, the light bulb. Thomas Edison didn't actually invent the light bulb, but he refined the filament, making it practical for everyday use. Along with his team of scientists, Edison is credited with producing a minor invention every 10 days and a major invention every 6 months. During his lifetime, Edison was granted an astonishing 1,093 patents.
The next invention I want to talk about is the typewriter. I know this one is perhaps not as exciting, but when Christopher Sholes invented the typewriter, it proved to be a game changer as well. The typewriter was first invented in 1867, and this revolutionized the way that office work was conducted. I'm sure you all are well aware that you can type much faster than you can write by hand. I can type almost as fast as a person can speak. But it takes me forever to write a document. I certainly believe that handwriting notes is a more effective way to implant facts into the memory because it takes more time. You have to concentrate more on what you write by hand. But of course, the effectiveness of a typewriter is that you can produce written documents far more quickly. It increases efficiency and it revolutionized the way that office work was conducted. But the next invention I want to talk about was also certainly a game changer, the telephone. And you're watching a silent film here showing how the Alexander Graham Bell telephone works. This silent film was made in 1927 to demonstrate how these phones worked. Alexander Graham Bell was the first to develop a successful form of synchronous audio communication. Asynchronous communication had already been developed. The telegraph, Samuel F.B. Morse had developed the telegraph years prior, but it was very limited in what it could do. It could transmit electronic signals, and if you did so in a pattern, you could communicate. But Alexander Graham Bell improved on this invention, as you're seeing, and this revolutionized communication. People can now talk instantly to one another across great distances. And so here's a picture of an early telephone. As you can see, they were limited in their functions. There's no button for Gmail or Facebook. I know, how did they survive? But it was a game changer. Instant, synchronous communication. Some argue the First World War might never have happened had it not been for this device, and we'll get to that later.
The turn of the century symbolized the end of the old America. The former rural country, grounded in agriculture and hand-worked goods, had become an urbanized industrial Goliath. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad had at long last fulfilled the march of manifest destiny. New industries set the stage for future growth, and the new Colossus had seen a native population become a land of immigrants. Revolutionary changes achieved at a revolutionary pace. As the 19th century faded, the nation, having survived its struggle for independence, the ravages of a civil war, and the impact of an era, stood poised on the brink of a new century. Much remained to be done, but the foundation had been laid. America was now strong enough to face the unique challenges the 20th century would bring.
So industrialization is going to change a lot of things. Number one, it makes the world of work easier. I can't imagine having to produce what all I've created for you by hand. Ugh. I would far rather type it. It also improves the world of work, increases efficiency, which translates to a better standard of living. Even us, the working poor. Yes, I are the working poor. Even us. We live like kings. If you think about just 200 years ago, we lived like kings. That's progress that has finally trickled down to all of us. Workers can now be consumers. Even though we are the working poor, I can still obsess about the Nintendo Switch and how someday I'm going to get one. I was just looking at it last night. So I'm trying to save up. But I can save up, that's the point. Workers can be consumers. But then finally, and the next clip I want to watch, or I want to show you, is one of A&E's top 100 films of all time. It's a clip from a movie called Metropolis. And it's about these revolutions in technology. Some say it's the first sci-fi film. And the reason I want to show it to you is because the word robot was coined. It's a Czech term, Czechoslovakia. It's a Czech term to describe slave, wage slave. Because some say that these new technologies like the assembly line reduce the value of human workers. And I'll let you decide for yourself.